I audited security logs. One route entered a store that wasn't there. The first thing I want you to understand is that I am not a person who believes in things. I audit security logs for a county facilities office. 22 years of patrol routes, badge scans, vendor invoices, and incident closures. I have seen every kind of bad data a contract security system can produce, and I have learned to distrust all of it equally. But there is a patrol route in our vendor dashboard right now that runs through a store with no lease, no business license, no unit number, and no entry in the property map. A guard walks it. The route completes between 2 and 3 in the morning. The checkpoint scans clean, and the audit approval for that route has my initials on it. I never performed that audit. I want to lay this out the way I would lay out any compliance review. Plainly, in order, with the records as they actually exist, because the records are the only part of this I can prove. And the records are also the part that frightens me most. I want to be honest about my job before any of this starts sounding like something it isn't. It is not exciting work. It is the opposite of exciting work. It is the work of making sure that what the county paid for is what the county received, and that when something goes wrong in an empty building at 3 in the morning, the paperwork that follows is clean enough to survive a lawyer. I review overnight patrol logs from the contract security, vendors the county uses to watch vacant and county-managed commercial properties. When a building sits empty, when a lease lapses, when a plaza goes into receivership and the county ends up holding the security obligation, a guard gets sent through on a tour. The guard carries a phone or a wand. At each checkpoint there is a small tag, an NFC sticker usually, screwed to a wall or a door frame. The guard taps it. The tap creates a timestamp. The timestamps stack up into a route. The route becomes a line item on an invoice. My work is to make sure the line items match reality. That the guard actually walked the route. That the checkpoints scanned are checkpoints that exist. That we are not paying for patrol minutes nobody performed. That when an incident happens in one of these dead buildings, it gets closed correctly, with the right codes in the right fields, so the county does not end up exposed when somebody's attorney comes asking why the property wasn't watched. That last part is most of the job, really. Liability language. The whole apparatus exists so the county can stand up in a room someday and say it exercised reasonable care and point to a stack of timestamps as proof. It is unglamorous and it is mostly about catching mistakes. And there are so many mistakes. Guards miss checkpoints. It happens constantly. A guard comes to the end of a long shift, skips the back corridor, taps the last tag from memory 2 doors early, and the route shows a gap where presence should be. A tag falls off a wall during a cold snap and nobody replaces it, so the scan count drops while the vendor still bills the full route, and I'm the one who has to notice the difference and claw the minutes back. Floor plans in our archive go stale. A tenant renovates, knocks 2 units into one, moves a demising wall 15 feet, and nobody sends the county an updated drawing. So the plan I'm auditing against is a building that no longer exists in that shape, and I learn to treat every floor plan as a guess until I can confirm it. Unit numbers duplicate. When a plaza changes management, the new company renumbers, but the old numbers linger in the badge system, and suddenly there are 2 Unit 4s in the same building, and the route assigns checkpoints to the wrong one. I once spent a full day untangling a contract where every even-numbered unit had a twin, all because 2 management companies never reconciled their schemes. Tags get moved during renovation. A contractor pulls a checkpoint tag off a wall, sets it on a windowsill, and a month later it's been screwed back up in a different corridor, still reporting its old assigned location. quietly lying in the dashboard until somebody like me catches the drift. And vendors bill routes that are only partly walked. That's the one that costs real money. A guard completes 11 of 14 checkpoints. The app rounds the patrol minutes up to a full tour, and the invoice arrives clean. My job is to catch the 3 he skipped and make the vendor credit them back. I do that almost every week. It's a quiet little war over minutes, and I'm good at it. So when I tell you I found something strange, I need you to know that my first 10 reactions were all boring. My job is to assume error. My job is to never, ever assume something dramatic, because dramatic language in an audit narrative is how you get a county sued, and how you get a guard fired who did nothing wrong, and how you get yourself walked out of a building with a box. I am careful with words. That detail matters later. This started on an ordinary night shift review. February. The plaza in question is on the watch list under a parcel ID I won't read out, but in our files, it's just called the Brandt Crossing property. It's worth telling you what Brandt Crossing is, because the building is part of the record too. It was built as a retail strip a little over 30 years ago, out on the edge of the county where someone bet that the suburbs would keep marching in that direction. They didn't, not far enough. The plaza had a grocery anchor that left, then a discount store that left, then a long, slow decade of nail salons and check cashing, and a martial arts studio, and a tax office that opened every January and closed every May. Tenants came and went. The units were carved and ray-carved, walls moved, signage swapped. The directory board out front ray-lettered so many times that the plastic slots are worn shiny. The floor plan on file changed almost every year for a while, which is part of why this story is hard to tell cleanly. There is no single true version of that building. There are revisions. Eventually, it emptied out entirely. The last tenant, a furniture liquidator that was itself a kind of going out of business, locked up and walked away. The owner defaulted. The property went into receivership, and when a receiver holds a dead commercial property, somebody still has to watch it, because an empty building is a liability that attracts copper thieves and squatters and the kind of accident that ends up in court. So the obligation rolled to the county. We pay a contract vendor to send a guard through twice a night. Presence, deterrence. A line of timestamps that says we exercised reasonable care over a building nobody wants, until somebody buys it or it gets torn down. It is the kind of property where nothing is supposed to happen. That's the entire point of the patrol. Nothing happening, on the record, in writing, every night. I was clearing a backlog of route exceptions. An exception is just the system flagging that a route didn't complete the way it was supposed to. Usually it's a missed checkpoint. Usually I clear it in under a minute. This one would not clear. The route was logged as complete. All checkpoints scanned. Full patrol minutes. Clean. But the system had flagged it anyway with a code I rarely see. Location validation failure. The route had passed through a checkpoint inside a store called Unit 17B. I pulled the current floor plan for Brandt Crossing. There is no Unit 17B, the units run 1 through 16. Then jump to a back service block labeled with letters, but those are mechanical spaces. Electrical room, fire pump, a storage chase. There is no 17. There is no 17A, there is no 17B, and yet the scan was there. A valid NFC tag ID, tapped at 2:41 in the morning, timestamped, sequenced cleanly between checkpoint 16 and the exit checkpoint at the loading dock. A guard had, according to the log, walked into a store that the floor plan says is not a store, tapped a tag that should not exist, and walked out. I did what I always do. I started building the boring explanation. The first guess was the easiest: legacy floor plan. The plaza had been carved up and carved for 30 years. Maybe there really was a Unit 17B once, an old tenant, and the tag was never decommissioned, and the root template still carried it. Stale data. The most common thing in the world in this job, so I went to the archive. We keep old floor plan revisions. Some are scanned PDFs, a few are real CAD exports. I pulled every revision we had for Brandt Crossing, going back to the original build-out, and I read them in order, the way you'd read a building's whole life. I want to be precise here. There was never a Unit 17B not in the original plan, not in any renovation. The numbering had been stable for the entire documented life of the building. 16 retail units and the service block, across every revision, across every management company, across every date stamp in the archive. The walls moved, the numbers didn't. So my legacy theory was already weaker than I wanted it to be. But weaker isn't dead. Maybe the tenant operated under a unit number that never made it onto the official plan. It happens. Informal subdivisions. A big unit split in half by a tenant and sublet under a name the county never recorded. So I went to the lease records. No Unit 17B, no lease, current or expired, ever filed against that designation. Every lease in the file mapped to a numbered unit between 1 and 16, clean. The whole history of who paid rent in that building, and not one line of it mentioned a 17 of anything. I went to the business license database. Every business that wants to operate in the county pulls a license, and the license carries an address and a unit number. I searched the parcel. I searched the plaza name. I searched the string 17B against that address. Nothing. No business, active or lapsed, had ever been licensed at Unit 17B of that property. No one had ever filed a single piece of paper saying they did business in that space. I went to the parcel map. The county's own Geese layer, the authoritative one. The map that is supposed to be the final word on what physically exists where. I zoomed into the plaza footprint. I clicked through the unit polygons one by one, watching the little shapes light up as I selected them. There was no polygon for a 17B, the map simply did not contain that space. There was the back service block, drawn as one solid mechanical zone, and there was the exterior wall, and between them there was nothing for a store to be. At this point, a normal exception would already be resolved. The store doesn't exist. Therefore, the scan is garbage data. Therefore, I write it up as a vendor import error and I move on. So why couldn't I move on? Because of the tag. The NFC checkpoint tag has an ID. Every physical tag the vendor installs gets registered to a location in their dashboard. It's how they prove the guard was physically present. The ID is unique. It's not a name you can type in. It's a hardware identifier baked into the chip at manufacture. I pulled the vendor's checkpoint registry for the Brandt Crossing contract. The tag ID from the 17B scan was in the registry. Registered. Assigned. Active. Its assigned location field said Unit 17B, a physical chip with a unique hardware identifier, registered to a store that no floor plan, no lease, no license, and no map will admit exists. Somebody at some point had to hold that chip in their hand and program it and screw it to a wall and tell the system where it was. That's the part I couldn't write off as a clean import error. Import errors copy names. They don't manufacture hardware IDs. I made a note in my working file, not the official audit narrative, just my own notes. I wrote, tag exists, location does not. Reconcile. Then I went home and didn't think about it for almost a week because I had 40 other exceptions and a vendor invoice dispute that was actually going to cost real money. When I came back to it, the route had run again. Same plaza, same code, location validation failure, same checkpoint, Unit 17B scanned and sequenced. The timestamp was 2:53 in the morning. I checked the prior week. It had run the night I first found it, the night before that, and 3 more nights that week. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the same tag. Always clean otherwise. A guard walks in, taps, walks out. So I did the thing I should have done first if I weren't trying so hard to keep this small. I looked at who was walking the route. The vendor assigns guards to routes by badge. Each guard carries a badge that logs into the patrol app, and the patrol minutes get attributed to that badge for billing. I pulled the badge attribution for the Brandt Crossing overnight tour across that whole stretch. The badge that completed the 17B scan was the same badge each night. One guard. I had his name. I'll call him the night guard because using his real name feels wrong now, for reasons I'll get to. I emailed the vendor's account contact. Politely. The way you do when you don't want to start a contract fight. I said I had a route exception I needed help reconciling, a checkpoint that wasn't matching our floor plan, and could they confirm the assigned guard and have him clarify the corridor layout at the back of the building. The reply came 2 days later from a supervisor on their side, not the guard. The reply said the route was an old legacy configuration. It said the 17B checkpoint was likely a decommissioned tag still firing. It said the matter carried no contract impact and that I should disregard it. No contract impact. That phrase again. The phrase that closes 1,000 exceptions. But I had already checked the invoice. The patrol minutes that included the 17B scan were billed. Not disregarded. Billed. The county had paid in real dollars for a guard to be physically present inside a store that does not exist, for the seconds it took him to walk in and tap a tag and walk out. If it carried no contract impact, why were we paying for it? I asked that, carefully. I phrased it as a reconciliation question, the kind I send a dozen times a week. I asked whether the billed minutes for the 17B checkpoint should be credited back, given that the location couldn't be validated against the property record. I never got a clean answer. I got a phone call instead. The vendor supervisor called me, which they almost never do because phone calls don't leave a paper trail the way email does. He was friendly. He was vague in a practiced way. He used the words legacy configuration 3 or 4 times, the way you'd repeat a phrase you'd been told to repeat. He said these old contracts carry artifacts. He said nobody wanted to spend billable hours chasing a tag that didn't matter. He said again, no contract impact, and he said it like a man closing a door gently so it wouldn't make noise. I said I understood. I didn't, but I said it. That's when the dashboard started changing. The vendor's dashboard lets me see route detail with screenshots, little captured stills the guard's app takes at certain checkpoints. Some checkpoints require a FOD, a proof of presence image. I had seen the first week that the 17B checkpoint had photos attached. I hadn't looked closely. I'd been focused on the data, not the images. That was a mistake, an understandable one, but a mistake. When I went back to look at the photos, they were gone, not the checkpoint. The checkpoint was still there. The photos that had been attached to it were gone. The little thumbnail frames showed the gray broken image placeholder you get when a file's been pulled from the server. I checked the route history. The patrol minutes were still billed. The scan was still logged. The location still said 17B, but the proof of presence images for that one checkpoint across every night were gone. I want to be measured about this. Vendors clean up their storage. Images age out. There are retention policies. There is a boring explanation, and I reach for it the way I always reach for the boring explanation. But the images for every other checkpoint on the same route on the same nights were still there. The corridor outside Unit 12, the entrance vestibule, the loading dock, all present. Only 17B had been wiped. One checkpoint surgically cleared on a route the vendor had just told me twice not to worry about. I did the thing an auditor does. I made copies, or I tried to. I went to export the route record to PDF, the way I would for any exception I was going to escalate. The export completed. I opened it. The 17B line was not in the export. It was on my screen in the live dashboard right there, scanned at 2:53. It was not in the PDF the same dashboard had just generated from the same record, 2 seconds apart. I exported it again. Same result. The live view showed the scan. The official export omitted it. So now I had a record that existed when I looked at it and did not exist when I tried to keep it. I went to my supervisor. I'll be careful about how I describe him because he isn't a villain and I've worked under him for 9 years, and I think he was more frightened than I understood at the time. I brought him the exception. I showed him the live dashboard, the scan, the registered tag, the missing floor plan unit, the wiped photos, the export that dropped the line. I kept my language flat. I said we have a checkpoint registered to a location that doesn't appear in any property record. We're billing patrol minutes for it, and I can't reconcile it, and I want guidance on how to write it up. He looked at it for a long time, longer than the problem warranted if it were nothing. He asked me who else I'd talked to. I told him the vendor. He asked if I'd put any of it in writing in the file yet. I said no, only in my working notes. He seemed to relax slightly when I said that, and I noticed it, and I didn't understand it yet. Then he told me how to write it up. He said to log it as a legacy route discrepancy. Non-billable patrol exception, pending vendor correction. Floor plan validation issue. No contract impact. I said, but it is billable. We paid it. He said to log it as non-billable pending correction. I said, but the tag is registered to a location that isn't in the map. What do I write about the location? And he said the thing I keep hearing in my head. He said, do not narrative this. In our work, narrative is a verb. The audit narrative is the free text field where you describe what actually happened in plain language. It's the field that becomes evidence if there's ever a dispute or a lawsuit. To narrative something is to put it on the record in words instead of codes. He told me not to do that. Use the approved exception codes. Don't write sentences. Specifically, he said, do not write store does not exist anywhere in the file. I asked him why not. He said because if I write that a store doesn't exist while the system says a guard entered it, then either the system is wrong, which is a vendor problem we can manage, or I'm wrong, which is a me problem. And he said the third option, the one where both the system and I are right at the same time, is not an option we are allowed to have on the record. He wasn't unkind when he said it. He was tired. He talked the way a man talks when he's explaining a thing he's already lost an argument with. He said the audit narrative isn't a place for the truth. It's a place for the version of the truth that doesn't create exposure. He said that's not cynicism, it's the job. He said in 22 years I should know that by now. And then he said, quieter, that he'd seen the code before. Location validation failure. Not often, but before. I asked him if this had happened before. He didn't answer that. Not really. He looked at the wall behind me for a second, and then he told me to clear the exception with the approved language and let the vendor handle the tag. So I did. I want to be honest about that too. I followed the instruction. I logged it as a legacy route discrepancy, non-billable pending correction, no contract impact. I did not narrative it. I protected myself the way you learn to protect yourself after 22 years, and the route kept running, 2-something in the morning. Every few nights, Unit 17 be scanned, logged, clean, I should have left it, the exception was closed, the instruction was clear. My initials weren't on anything dangerous. There was no reason to keep pulling on it except the reason that has cost a lot of people a lot of sleep, which is that I could not stand not knowing. So I requested the CCTV. Brandt Crossing has its own camera system, separate from the patrol vendor. Old analog to digital cameras, the receiver maintained, indexed by corridor. To request footage, I file a CCTV review request, justify it against an open issue, and the property management contact pulls the clip and grants temporary viewing access through their portal. I justified mine against the closed route exception, which was a small lie of convenience because the exception wasn't really open anymore. I asked for the back corridor, the service block, the stretch where 17B was supposedly located, for the window around 2:53 a.m. on a night the route had run. It took a while. The property contact was slow, and when the clip came, it came with a note. The note said the camera index for that corridor was non-standard, that the footage might not match the current floor plan, and to disregard layout discrepancies. I should have known by then that every disclaimer in this story was a door someone was quietly closing. I watched the clip. The current floor plan says the camera covering that stretch of the service block looks down a short dead-end corridor that ends in a blank wall with a storage chase behind it, a nothing space, a place to keep a mop sink and a fire riser. The footage did not show a blank wall. It showed a corridor that kept going, past where the wall should be. And on the right side of that corridor, where the floor plan says there is solid structure, there was a storefront, dark glass, a doorway, the kind of recessed entrance every one of those dead retail units has. And at 2:53 a.m., a figure walked down that corridor, reached the doorway, paused, and went inside. I watched a man in a guard's uniform walk through a door that, according to every official record the county keeps, opens onto nothing. He was inside for less than a minute. The patrol log says the scan took 11 seconds. The footage says he was in there for 40. He came back out. He walked back up the corridor toward the camera, and for a moment before he passed under it, his face was lit by the camera's own infrared. I knew the face, not well, but I'd seen it. In old contract files, on a badge photo, on a notice that had circulated through our office a few years back. The night guard whose badge was completing the route had retired. And then, not long after, he had died. I remembered the death notice because the vendor had sent it as part of a routine personnel update, and somebody in our office had pinned the printout to the break room board for a week, the way people do. The badge walking the route belonged to a man who was not working there anymore because he was not alive anymore. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you I had a dramatic reaction. I didn't. I felt the specific, cold, administrative dread of a person who has just realized that the problem on his desk is now much larger than his desk. I tried to save the clip. I'd watched it once, streamed from the property management portal. When I went back to request a download, the file was gone. In its place was a folder marked restricted, and a message that CCTV access for that corridor index now required additional authorization, and that my prior request had been logged as fulfilled. I had seen it once. The system recorded that I'd been given what I asked for and then made sure I could never ask for it again. I went back to the personnel side of the file because I wanted to be certain about the guard before I let myself believe any of it. I'm an auditor. When something can't be true, I verify it twice. I pulled the old contract personnel file. His record was there, complete. Hire date, badge number, the routes he'd worked over the years, a clean history. There was a retirement date. There was a status change after it, the kind the vendor pushes through when someone leaves the workforce. And there was the death notice itself, attached to a routine personnel update, the same one I remembered from the break room board with a date on it. His badge was marked retired. His record was marked deceased. The vendor's own files said so in their own fields, stamped by their own system. And the route was still being walked under that badge. I went back to the root record one more time because I wanted to know who had closed the exception originally before me. Every exception has a closure trail. Somebody acknowledges it, somebody closes it, the system stamps the IDs. There was a closure note on the 17B root from before I'd ever touched it. It said, "Root verified, no further action." It was stamped with an employee ID. It was the night guard's ID, the retired one, the dead one. A root closure note verifying the root under the ID of the man whose badge was walking it. I checked the date against the death notice. Checking dates is the one thing I am genuinely good at. The closure was stamped weeks after he died. There is no clean explanation for that. A dead man does not log into a vendor portal and verify a root. An ID does not stamp a closure on its own. Somebody used his credential, or the system generated it, and I cannot tell you which possibility is worse. And then I found the thing that stopped me trying to explain any of it. I went to look at the audit history of the root itself, not the closures, the audit approvals. In our process, a root configuration has to be approved by a compliance auditor before it goes into active patrol. That approval is the gate. It's how a root becomes real, billable, official. The approval carries the auditor's employee ID and initials and a timestamp. The Brandt Crossing route that includes Unit 17B had an audit approval on it. The approval was mine, my employee ID, my initials, my exact wording. I have a way I write approval notes, a phrasing I've used for 22 years. Reviewed for compliance, root configuration accepted, no exceptions noted. And there it was, word for word in my voice with my credentials, dated 4 months before the root was ever assigned to that property. I did not approve that root. I went back through my own calendar, my own assignment logs, my own access records. On the date of that approval, I was not assigned to the Brandt Crossing contract. The contract hadn't even rolled to us yet. I had no access to that route on that date. There is a building access record that shows I badged into our own office that day and worked a completely different set of files. I have the badge log. I can prove where I was, and the approval is still there, with my initials, in my words. On a route I could not have seen, for a store that does not exist, approving a patrol that a dead man's badge would later walk. I want to describe what that does to a person. It is not fear the way films show fear. It is the slow removal of the floor. Because my entire job, my entire professional identity, is built on the idea that the record reflects what people did. That an approval means a person approved. That initials mean intent. That the file is downstream of reality. And here was a file that was upstream of me. A record that knew my handwriting before I'd written it. I did the only thing I had left. I drove out to the plaza, in daylight, on a Saturday. I told myself it was to verify the physical floor plan against the archive, which is a legitimate audit activity, which is the kind of thing you tell yourself when you are doing something you can't quite admit to. The plaza is exactly what you'd expect. A long, dead retail strip, half the signage stripped, the parking lot cracked, weeds in the seams, a few units with paper over the glass and a few with nothing behind the glass at all. I parked near the main entrance, where the public directory board still stands, the kind with the little white plastic letters in black grooved slots. It lists the units that ever existed. I read every line of it, top to bottom, twice. There is no Unit 17B on the directory. There is no Unit 17 at all. The board stops at 16, the way the floor plan does, the way the map does, the way every honest record of that building does. I walked the interior corridor. The county has a key for the watch list properties, and I'm authorized to access them for audit, so I let myself into the common corridor and I walked to the back, to the service block, to where the camera had looked. The corridor ends in a wall, a blank wall, exactly where the current floor plan says it should be. Painted cinder block, a little water stained. A fire riser cabinet on the left with its red pipe and its locked glass front, and a service door on the right marked with a faded label for the storage chase. No storefront, no dark glass, no recessed doorway, a dead end. The most ordinary dead end in the world. I stood there a long time. I put my hand flat on the wall. It was solid and cold and real, and it had clearly been there for decades. There was a hairline crack running up through the paint and a patch where someone had filled a hole years ago. It was an old wall. It was a true wall. There is no store here. I want that on the record in plain language, the language I was told not to use. There is no store here. The floor plan is right. The map is right. The wall is right. But I had my phone out with the vendor route map open, the line that shows the patrol path overlaid on the property. I'd had it open the whole walk, watching my own location dot move along the route. And as I stood at the dead end, my dot at the wall, the route line on the screen did not stop at the wall. It continued, past my position, through the cinder block. It turned right where the service door is, and it drew a small loop, the checkpoint marker, in a space that on my screen was behind the wall. The marker was labeled 17B. I watched the line enter a wall I was touching with my own hand. And then the map refreshed, the way maps do when the app recenters or reloads the tiles. The screen blinked, and when it came back, the line ended at the wall clean the way it should, and the 17B marker was gone, and the route looked completely ordinary, and there was nothing on my phone that I could have shown anyone as proof of what I had just seen. I stood there with my hand still on the block for a while longer. Then I locked up and I drove home. I did not sleep that night. The next week I did my job. I cleared exceptions. I reviewed invoices. I argued a vendor down over 41 disputed patrol minutes on a different contract, and I won, and it felt like nothing. I drank the bad office coffee out of the same stained mug. I behaved like a man who has decided to let a thing lie because that is what I had decided. But things were different in small ways I started to notice in myself. I stopped using direct language, not just in the file, everywhere. In emails, in hallway conversations, I caught myself softening, hedging, saying discrepancy where I meant impossible. I kept a private notebook at home now, a paper one, where I wrote down what I'd actually seen in plain words because I no longer trusted any system to keep my words the way I wrote them. I started avoiding the people I worked with, not out of fear of them, out of a feeling I couldn't name, that if I talked too long I'd say the wrong true thing in the wrong place and it would end up somewhere it couldn't be unsaid. And I kept one habit. Every few days I checked the audit approval history for the Brandt Crossing route. I told myself I was monitoring it. The truth is I was watching the wall on my screen, the way you keep checking a door you know is locked. The vendor, meanwhile, kept closing things. Open items I hadn't resolved would resolve themselves overnight, marked corrected. No explanation in the notes. The invoice dispute over the 17B minutes simply disappeared from the open queue one morning. Status closed. No credit issued, no reason given. Every loose thread I'd left hanging got quietly tied off by a hand I never saw. My supervisor passed my desk one afternoon and stopped, the way he doesn't usually. He didn't ask about Brandt Crossing. He just said lightly that he was glad I'd kept that one clean, that some files are better left the way they close, that people who go digging into legacy discrepancies tend to find their own names in places they don't expect. He said it like a kindness. Maybe it was. Then he walked on. That's around when I found the last thing. There is a new approval in the system now. Recent. It appeared sometime in the last few weeks. It is not for the 17B route. The 17B route is still there, still running, still closed under a dead man's ID, still approved months early under my stolen initials. That one hasn't changed. The new approval is for a different patrol route, A route at the same property. A route configuration that does not exist yet. There is no route built. There are no checkpoints assigned. There is no guard scheduled. The route is a shell, a placeholder, an empty record waiting for a configuration that nobody has created. And it has an audit approval attached to it. My employee ID, my initials, my exact wording. Reviewed for compliance, route configuration accepted, no exceptions noted. The approval is dated next year. It is dated a day I have not lived yet. A day that has not happened. A day on which, according to the system, I will sit down and review a patrol route that doesn't exist for a store that doesn't exist, and I will accept it and I will note no exceptions. I have not done it. I am telling you now in plain language on whatever record this becomes that I have not done it and I do not intend to do it, but my initials are already there. My words are already there. The system already knows how I will write it. It is as certain of that future approval as it was certain of the past one I never performed. To the file, the difference between months ago and next year is nothing. They are both just dates with my name on them. I raised it once more, gently, with my supervisor. I didn't show him the future date. I'd learned that much. I just asked in a general way whether there was a process for disputing an audit approval that an auditor doesn't recognize as his own. He looked at me for a while, the tired look again. He said the safest thing is to leave the record as it stands. He said a dispute creates a narrative, and a narrative creates exposure, and exposure is the one thing we are paid to prevent. He said the route carries no contract impact. He said it was a legacy route discrepancy. He said, the way you'd close any file, no further action. So the route still runs. Between 2 and 3 in the morning some nights, a scan completes at Unit 17B, a store with no lease, no license, no unit number, no polygon on the map, no doorway in the wall I touched with my hand. The closure note still carries the ID of a man who is dead. The first approval still carries my initials on a day I can prove I was elsewhere. And the second approval still waits, dated next year, for a route that does not exist, ready for the day the system has already decided I will sit down and accept it. I have my badge log. I have my calendar. I have the date I drove out and put my hand on solid block. I have my paper notebook in plain words in my own hand. I have every reason and every record to know I never did and never will approve that route. The system has my initials. I keep thinking one of us has to be wrong. The system, or me, that was always the rule. That was the third option my supervisor said we're not allowed to have, the one where the record and the man are both telling the truth at the same time. I'm telling you the truth. The record is right there next to me, telling you the same thing in my own words, in my own hand, dated for a day that hasn't come. No contract impact. Legacy route discrepancy. No further action.